In this video, we are going to be discussing what is symbology and how we symbolize categorical data and how we symbolize quantitative data. When I talk about symbology, what that refers to is the way that data is represented on the map. The colors you use, the line thicknesses that you use, and the symbols that you use to represent the data that you're trying to show. And when we are making maps of data, we are making maps of either categorical data or quantitative data. Categorical data or qualitative data is essentially text data. So if we were, for instance, making a land use map of a particular township, that categories would be residential, commercial, industrial, and so forth. But if we were making a quantitative map, it would be fields and attributes like population, which is a number, or something of that nature, median income. So when we are creating maps, you have to be considerate of the type of data that you are symbolizing in order to make the best map possible. So we are going to get started in making maps based on a particular category. And for this, I'm going to add some data. And I'm actually going to add the data from an adjacent county, Berks County, for Bethel Township. When my data is added to the map, you're going to see that it's all symbolized in the same way. It's all that green color for all the parcels. And ArcGIS just picks a color to, when it adds it, it's based on complete randomness. So there's no rhyme or reason to what color it is. And what this is good for, single symbol, is just understanding the general geographic distribution of features. So not all the time you want to symbolize your data. Sometimes it's completely appropriate to have it as single symbol, as you see here. But if we open up our attribute table for this data set, and this is parcel data, which shows the property lines in Bethel Township, and we can see that in here we have the name of the landowner, we have their mailing address, we have a description of their dwelling, we had the deed book and page number of their the deed, we have then also a class field. This class field is indicative of the land use on the particular parcel, and notice that they're codes. There's E, R, F, and so forth. So E stands for exempt, R stands for residential, and so forth. So this is the field that I want to make a map based off of. And again, this is a category, it's not a quantity. So what we are going to do is go to our layer properties to symbolize this by that particular category. So to do that, I double click on the data set. I go to my symbology tab, and in here you have the different types of maps that you can make of your data. Because the class field is a category, we click on category, and we're going to be making what's called a unique value map. So in order to create these, there's a couple of things that you have to input. The first is, and the most important, is telling it what field you're making the map based upon. And in this case, it was the class field. So I'm going to scroll down to that. And it doesn't automatically add the values here. So we click Add All Values, and we uncheck all other values. That by default is there, and for 99.9% of the time, you don't want that showing up in your legend, so it's just a good practice to uncheck it. And then you can see that we're using this color ramp for our symbology, and you can choose another color ramp. When we are dealing with categorical data, it's best to have colors that are completely different. Don't pick something, kind of like this, where the colors are so similar. That's more appropriate for quantitative data, not qualitative data. So I'm going to kind of just stick with this color ramp because I can change these later. And I'm going to just hit apply. And very quickly you can see that we have a map showing the various land use of Bethel Township. However, it's not probably the best map yet because over in our table of contents, we have these codes, and if you're not somebody that's familiar with the data, you're not going to have any idea what those codes mean. Also, the file name is something that would be mysterious to somebody that might be looking at the map. So I'm going to clean all of that up in here in my symbology tab. I'm going to call these what they are in actuality. Now, this is data that I'm familiar with, so I know what the codes mean, but if you're not familiar with it and don't know what the codes mean, whenever you download or share data, or get data from somebody, metadata should also come with the data layer that you're getting. And in the metadata, there is a section on attributes and what they mean. So it would give you the definitions of them, and then it would also tell you what the codes mean. So it's that metadata document, and I'll show you one of those later, that tells us, you know, what our data means. So C stands for commercial, E is exempt, F is farmland, I is industrial, R is residential, and UT is utility. Now, something to notice before I go any further, you also have this field that's called count. That count field is telling us how many of the parcels are in each of these categories. So on the map, we have 119 commercial properties. We have 675 farmland properties and 1370 in terms of industrial. So that is, you know, good information to have. So I'm going to just click apply, and notice how those changes take effect over there. Now notice we also have this empty one, and this essentially means that there was no on 30 of the parcels there was no input of land use. So I'm going to just put in there unknown or no data, something along that line, to alert the map user that you don't know what that actually is. So then I hit apply again. And notice that unknown is the very first category, and that's probably not what we want to be first. We probably would want it to be, you know, the one that is the most. Before I change that, if you notice, everything was added in alphabetical order. So that's why it chose the order that it did. When I changed that, you know, that messed that up. But we can actually move these values around a little bit to make it the most important ones be on top and the less important to be on the bottom. To elevate any of these, we just simply click on it and then hit these arrows to move things up or down. So I'm going to move residential to the top, unknown to the bottom, and I'll get farmland up a couple, and then it looks like we're in pretty good order, and it looks like I have a extra space there, so I'll get rid of that. And then hit apply, and notice that that changes in my table of contents, the order and so forth. And notice that that means a little bit more than R, C, F, and so forth. We didn't really know what those meant. This we can understand what it means. The other thing that I would do before I leave my layer properties is go into that general tab. And if you remember from the previous video, we talked about the necessity of renaming your layer name to reflect what it is actually showing rather than the file name. So I'm going to change this to land use because it is showing land use in Bethel Township. And then I'm going to hit OK. And now we have a nice, neat legend over here in our table of contents that helps us interpret the map that we're looking at. So that was one example of making a map based on a category or making a unique value map. And we can make some others. Let's do another one, and I'm actually going to add a data frame, and I'll get into data frames a little bit later. But what adding data frames allows you to do is to have more than one map on a map layout, and oftentimes you need more than one map on a map layout. For this one, I'm going to add the data layer for Lebanon County parcels that shows which properties are in ag security areas and which ones are not. And that is called Parcel Camera. So again, this is looking at the parcels of Lebanon County. And if we look at the attributes that we have available to us, one of the fields that we have all the way at the end is a field that lets us know whether or not the property is in an ag security area or not. So we're going to symbolize the map based on this category or quality. So to do that, again, I go to my layer properties. I go to my symbology tab. Because it is a category, not a number or a quantity, I'm going to select category, and then I select ag security, add all values. I uncheck all other values. And again, I come in here and change the labels. And the first one is unknown. Second one is not in ag security. And you can kind of label these however you want. And also you can reorder things appropriately. Again, I'm going to put yes and no above the unknown. And you can recolor these to whatever you would like. Because ag security, that in my head, that means that it should be a green parcel. I'm going to change that to a green color. And not in ag security, I would say that would make it a grayish color. And then unknown, I'm going to make that no color. And then when I hit apply, we have a map showing which properties are in ag security and which are not. So again, that's just using our attribute table to symbolize upon that particular field. Now, this is not how I would actually end this map. This would be just one step in making the map. One other data layer that I would probably add to this is the actual townships. And while right now that doesn't look like it's being very useful, if you hollow out that the townships, make the outline width a little bit bigger, and then hit OK, it gives us a little bit more geographic reference as to where ag security areas are and where they're not. And then based on what we learned in a previous video, we could just go in and to our labels tab and change our label to label on the township name. That way we also then know which township is which, and I would probably play with the color of the label a little bit more to make it a little bit to pop a little bit more, but this is probably a more appropriate map than just symbolizing ag security area yes or no. This gives it a little bit more geographic reference. So that's just another example of a unique value map. And again, the key thing is that you use unique value maps to symbolize categories or qualitative data. You don't use them for numbers, only in rare occasions when you know that's what you are doing. Like zip codes might be something you could get away with, but like actual things like median income is not what you would want to use a unique value map for. So that's two examples of unique values. Now, the other type of data that we have is quantitative data, and we usually are symbolizing counts and amounts, but it might be ranks or ratios that we are doing. So what I'm going to do is add another data frame and add another data set. And for this, I am going to add again, Lebanon County townships. And if we look at the attribute table in here, we have attributes for a number of different demographic factors. And I'm just going to focus on population for right now. I want to make a population map of Lebanon County townships. So to do that, I double click my data layer. I go to the symbology tab. I select quantities, and then I select which field that I'm making the map based on. And in this case, I'm making it based on the total population. By default, ArcGIS will make class breaks for you based on the values that are in the attribute table. And you can see that it by default will create 5 classes, and then select whatever color ramp that you used last in your map making. So yours probably won't be this when you do it for the first time. It's usually like a orangish brownish scheme that's selected. But in here, what you can do is you're going to want to clean up these values to make it a little bit more readable for your map audience. And the first thing that we would probably want to do is get rid of all of those zeros after the decimal point, because population is whole numbers, is whole people. It's not, you know, half persons or some things like that. So there's no need for having decimal places. So I'm going to click on my word label, go to Format Labels, and then change that to 0. While I'm in here, I'm also going to show my 1,000 separators. That means it's going to put commas in numbers over 1,000. I highly suggest that you do that all the time because it makes your numbers much more readable. It gets particularly difficult after you have like in the hundreds of thousands. If you don't have commas in your number values, it makes it really hard to read and interpret the map. So I'm going to hit OK, and notice how that changes. It doesn't look like my commas selected. There we go. You can see now how that's just a little bit more readable. And if I hit apply, it applies that over here. So I'm going to do a couple of different things before I move forward, because we're not done yet. I'm going to first again go to the general tab to change the name of this. This is median income 2015, and I'm putting the year there because that's pretty important. Depending when your data source is, your latest data source on this might be the U.S. Census that was done in 2010. You want to denote that. This is a projected number from the Esri stats. So I'm making sure that I put the actual year in there, just so, again, my map audience knows when this data is from. I hit apply, and notice how that takes effect in my table of contents. Now I'm going back to symbology because I want to talk about a little bit more about this. Notice how these are kind of just wacky breaks, and they're not necessarily really all that wacky because it was using the natural breaks algorithm to make different classes. So it basically found natural breaks in the data and grouped it together based on that. But again, for your map audience, it's a little sloppy. So you can do a couple of things. The first thing you can do is, if you wish, you can add more classes or take away classes. And this is something to be very cautious of. You might think it might be cool to add, 9 classes, but what happens there is, look at these colors. They look awfully similar. How do you distinguish one between the next? It's very difficult. So you don't want to go really more than 7 classes. That's kind of the rule of thumb, 5 to 7 classes for graduated color maps. You might also, though, be saying, well, just change the color scheme. Look at all these awesome color schemes that are in there. And you got to be careful of that, because the term graduated color map means that the color gradually changes and gets darker as it goes from less to more. The reason for that is because it's intuitive to a map user. If something's light, you just kind of know that there's less of something. If something is dark, there's more of something. It's just an intuition thing. If you pick something that has where there's no gradual change, where it's just random colors for everything, you don't know which goes which what. It's not an intuitive color scheme. So it's really important that for graduated color maps, you pick schemes like you see here that go from light to dark. You're not picking something like this or something like this because it's just not appropriate for the type of data. So now that I know I want 5 classes, I'm going to click on the classify button, and then our classification histogram comes up here, and this tells us a number of things. This area, the classification statistics, gives us information about median income in our attribute table. It's telling us what the minimum is and what the maximum this is population. The minimum population is and the maximum population. It also tells us the sum of all them. So this is really, the sum is basically telling us how many people live in Lebanon County. You have the mean and median and so forth. These stats can sometimes come in really handy when you just need fast answers about things. So don't shy away from there. Over here is where we can change the classification method. And again, as I mentioned, by default, ArcGIS will use the natural breaks algorithm to create classes, but there is also other ones that you can be used. We will be covering equal interval, quantile, and standard deviation in the cartography course, but the one that we're going to be using is actually manual. But I'm not going to change it to manual because I'm just going to do it without actually changing it. So coming down here, this is essentially the number line of the values that are in your population. And I'm sorry I mislabeled that. I actually can change that. Let me just quickly do that. I'm talking about median income too much. Okay, back in here, I'm going to change these breaks and round them off a bit. And when you look at these blue lines, this blue line is essentially the break. So that's 783. This is 3186 and so on forth. So that's showing you where the breaks are. You can manually drag these to put them where you want, or you can just change the values over here. And I would suggest changing them over here because to get the blue bars at the exact number that you want is almost nearly impossible. So you come over here to your break values and you round them off. But you start at the bottom and move to the top. You'll probably find out why when you start experimenting, because if you put a value here that is higher than the one below it, it messes everything up and it starts doing wacky things. So it's always best to work from the bottom and go up. So the maximum amount of population in any of the townships is 25,661. So in order to include that in the classification, we had to put a number higher than that last number. So I'm going to just round that off to 26,000. I'm going to round off the one above it to 12,000. I'll do 5,000 for this one, 3,000, and I'll do 1,000. And it's going to slightly change what this looks like when I do that, because some of these townships might change classes because I did round those numbers off. So I hit OK and apply. And now we have a population map that has the values a little bit easier and cleaner to see and interpret. So what we would probably want to do so that we can make some interpretations of this map, we probably want to label our townships so that we know which township is which. So I'm going to label by the municipality name, and I'm going to hit OK. And now we have a quick graduated color map showing population in Lebanon County townships. And when you're looking at this, the light areas indicate little population, the darker areas indicate more population. So that's one example of a graduated color map. I'm gonna do one more example. And I'm going to use the example from the parcels. And I'm going to cheat when I add the data here. And this is a cool little cheat for you to know about. What you can do, if you have the data already in a map that you used previously that's open, just drag it down and it pops it in there. But instead, this time, instead of symbolizing by whether or not it's an ag security or not, I'm going to be symbolizing by the value of the parcel. So if we open up this attribute table and we scroll over, we are going to be making a map of the total assessment of the parcel. So we can see you know, the various assessment values for the parcels in Lebanon County. So again, to do that, I can double click on my data layer. I can go to my symbology tab. We're going to change this to quantities because that is a number, so we'll select that. And then we select total assessment. And I'm getting this thing that says maximum size reached. Not all records are being used. That we have to change the sample size, and that's okay. We can fix that. And I'm just going to hit OK. And before I go any further, I'm going to click the classify button so I can change the sampling here. So right now it's only, the sample size is 10,000. I'm going to add a couple of zeros to that so that it includes all the parcels in Lebanon County. So now if I go back, we should have all them. And I'm going to do 6 classes this time, and I'll select a different color scheme just to be a little different. Actually, we'll do that green since assess value equals money, and green is money. There we go. So we have our color scheme, and we want to now format our labels. I'm going to, again, get rid of all the zeros because it just makes it hard to read, and I'm going to add commas. And then it will make the breaks for us, and then I'm going to hit apply. In here, you might be able to argue keeping these values the same because they all end in zeros, not like the previous example where they were kind of a little bit more wacky. So I'm just going to keep that as is. So when I hit OK, then we can see how much the parcels are assessed for. And because everything is so similar here, and some of these shades are really hard to distinguish, I'm going to change that back to 5 classes, hoping that some of the distinction will show between them. And it's a little bit difficult on that to see some distinction. Before I get out of here, I'm going to rename this assessed value. And I'm also going to perform the cheat that I did earlier by dragging the Lebanon townships down so I can just see the distinction in the different townships. Something I will mention that happens when you are symbolizing data like parcels is a really good example of it. Notice how here in Lebanon, the city of Lebanon, all we're really seeing is gray because the gray is the outline color of the symbol, and because these parcels are so much smaller, that gray is really overwhelming it, and that really makes a map pretty well impossible to interpret. What you can do to counter that is go back to your symbology tab, come in here to where your symbols are located, right click on any one of the symbols and go to properties for all symbols and change that outline color to no color, hit OK again, And you're going to see that that really cleans up. It gets rid of all that gray that just overwhelm things. So you can kind of see, you know, the clusters and so forth of the various assessed values. You can see very quickly that up in this area, the assessed value is much higher. And likely because it's just a different use up there. And you can see, you know, different pockets of where the assessed value for homes is greater. So that is another example of a graduated color map. So again, all that is based on is a number or a quantity. Categories are used when you have text data. Quantities are used when you have number data in the field that you are symbolizing. In the next video, we are going to be learning how to make a map from start to finish now that you know how to symbolize your data and how to label features.